In this jungle guide, we are going to have a look at advanced jungle pathing to show you how you can become a complete and aggressive jungler no matter what champion you're playing, because the player we have under study in this video has an absolute champion ocean. And the strategies he employs with the pick I've chosen for the video really do work well with any sort of jungler that you might play. It's all about reading the information, adapting your pathing, but having certain fundamentals that you use no matter the situation. And yes, that means when you're ahead and when you're behind, and we shall have a good look at all of it. So if you do enjoy these videos, please consider leaving a like and of course subscribing. Comment below what other videos you want to see. And now, without further hesitation, let's begin. And yes, you're seeing correctly, we're using Rumble, an exotic pick now off meta, but it still has a place and it still functions very well within the jungle ecosystem. Now, something I talk quite frequently about in a lot of these videos is your beginning with your pathing. Where do you start? What's our game plan? How do we navigate the matchups? Because many players on my coaching VODs that you'll see on Patreon, of course signups are there as well, struggle if the first rotation doesn't go as planned. Now, in this situation, you're seeing the Rumble starting level 1. Why is that good? Well, for one, you don't have to get leashed, which means your laners can go to lane and they can get to business. They can look to 2v2, they can look to 1v1. If they are lane bullies, they can get to tying up the enemy laners to a light post. Your laners, if they're feeling kind and generous, might also decide to throw you a fake leash your way, but it doesn't really matter because you're still not being leashed in any way. Now, the point of starting Raptors and then going into Krugs, as you are seeing, is to ensure we have the fastest route to level 6. If you're playing any sort of jungler that likes getting 6 really quickly, think your Nocturnes, even your Rengars, and yes, your Evelyns, and you don't want a leash, this is one of the best ways to do it. However, people's first clears are not always optimized when you do this. For example, Rengar's never going to start Raptors, and even though Kayn can, it's better to get a leash on red and do a regular sequence. However, there are a lot of benefits to this kind of sequence, and because the Raptors will be the first thing you have taken, they will be the first thing to respawn, which means you go into Krugs right afterwards, so that when tier 2 Raptors and tier 2 Krugs show up, that's the second spawn of both those camps, they will show up in order, allowing you to stay out with a good extended sequence in the early phase. Now, if you're new to the channel, that's a lot of buzzwords. If you're a lower elo player, you have no idea what I'm talking about. So let me fully explain. After you've done Raptors, Krugs, red, you go into your Wolves. In theory, you can go Grump into blue, but blue into Grump works just fine. Make sure you track the enemy jungler. Are they pathing in the same direction? Are they pathing in the opposite direction? Usually in this case, they like to start red and go down, which means we will be by ourselves. That means you can now smite Crab. In this particular game, you would have seen the Echo Show bottom lane. As a good and astute jungle tracking jungler, you'll notice he has 20 CS, which means either his Krugs or his Grump will be available. We move on up, we place a ward just to see. This player has done that in every game I've watched from the blue side perspective. Obviously in the red side, you can do it, but it's a little bit different. You can also start Wolves into blue and Grump if you choose. But after this check to see whether he can invade, counter gank, or look top, he takes the Crab. He likes to gank mid lane first. In these other examples, you'll see he doesn't always have success in terms of getting the kill. He either has proximity to an assist, or he simply has presence to, de-push the wave in a good way. But in this game, yes, they get a kill on the Yone. And that's rule 1, have a game plan and try and execute it correctly. Being an aggressive jungler means you need a lot of kills and a lot of assists in the early game. However, how does that work for someone who's trying to rush 6 and farm a lot? While you do want map impact, you're not necessarily looking to gank your lanes all the time. You're looking to rotate, or as we say, reactively path to situations where there's a fight and you can get there and infect it. But there's also another way to read the map and get the most out of your kills and assists, and we're going to touch on that now. So after that mid lane gank, he does Raptors into Krugs. Because he did Raptors into Krugs on the first rotation, they spawn together, which means he can do them together. If you can potentially gank on the bottom side here, go for it, have a look, see if something's available, but you really don't want to overstay at this point. We have a lot of cash monies, we want to spend it, we want to get back on the map for our second Grump, our second Wolves, our second blue, we want to look for a dive top lane, we know the enemy jungler is going to be resetting and going from Krugs down again, and having crucial itemization spikes if you want to be an aggressive jungler and really carry the game. The map doesn't really care what jungler you are. The item spikes you have, the level leads you have, and the tempo you have are all that matter. It doesn't matter what jungler's applying them, yeah? Because as long as you have those 3 things in a lead, what's the enemy jungler going to do unless you make a mistake or unless the matchup is really unfavored towards you, in which case you need to practice a different pathing mechanism, which of course I will link in the description below. So what you're seeing in this particular game is that the Rumble does his Wolves into Grump, nothing else is available, his LeBlanc has prior thanks to his early gank in the mid lane, and obviously Yone is 2-1-0 at this point, it's worth noting. So she does what she does well and what all mid laners do in the meta, Katarina, LeBlanc, roam to side lanes and enjoy feasting on their bones. Usually it's bottom lane, but why not 3v1 the top laner, that's fun. And of course, in this particular situation, if you track the Leona, you know she's going to show up as well. So Rumble does a nice scan, a little bit of a lane gank. There's a forced skirmish and a fight. He's very close to 6, and his team is able to come out ahead. Now, if you want to be an aggressive jungler with the most damage, most kills and assists, still having high farm, and really carrying every game you play, no matter what pick you're playing, be honest with yourselves here. Would you have actually gone for this play, seeing the information as you see it, or would you have decided to maybe go grub walls down? Would you have looked to hold mid lane? Would you have looked to counter jungle? Very few junglers have this patience here to play off of their team, specifically roaming mids. And go ahead and have a look at the rest of these highlights from another game. This Lucian basically did negative damage the whole game and did literally nothing to help win. The Rumble still played around it with the same kind of pathing principles. He still reactively moved to fights. The same thing in this game where he has a Silas mid lane. So it's not always contingent on your mid laner being ahead, but you have to create the prior you want for these particular plays, and then you have to play off of them accordingly. He looks to clear a quadrant, then he looks to make plays. Only if there's nothing on the map, but if there is something on the map, he will look to make the play and then reward himself with that quadrant. Now, one of the more advanced principles I talked about years ago already, I called it the loop method. It's essentially where you draw a circle with your pathing. Now, we've spoken about spaghetti pathing where you overlap yourselves and that just looks like a bowl of spaghetti, which is great to eat, but not great to jungle with. Nor do you want to bring a bowl of spaghetti to the jungle, but it allows you to swap your pathing direction as necessary. We just had a fight on the top side. We know the Echo's going to be in the bottom quadrant. If you wanted to go Krugs, Red, Raptors, and sequence up to the Herald, that's a fine play. But now you're leaving your bot lane at the whims of the enemy mid laner roaming, at the whims of the enemy jungler trying to give them a good spanking with his paddle. All while, yes, you get the Herald, you get to snowball top lane, but would that be the right play for us, the people, the aggressive junglers? No, mes petits chéris, we need to look for the aggressive plays that also deny the enemy jungler playing some aggressive defense. So, the animated maps would have shown it to you in principle, but let's look at it in terms of reality here. We do Krugs, Red, Raptors, we see or know through either wards or tracking what's happening from the enemy team. And we see, of course, the enemy bot laner going aggressive against our bot lane. We take that personally as Michael wants us to, and we move on down for the counter gank. Now, if you get there first, there's no counter gank. It's just you ganking before him, and he's wasted his time sequencing down and gets nothing. If you do get there as he's ganking, yes, it's a counter gank. You're not always gonna get kills, but there's benefits to be made by chunking and forcing them to base, by collapsing and killing the enemy jungler, by your mid laner playing off of you so that she's actually there to help out, which is again a byproduct of your early level ganks to help her get that prio. And remember, aggressive jungling means kill conversion ratio. You get some kills, we take some small objectives. We get some kills, we go bonking a tower. I made a whole video, no one watched it, yet it is the most crucial statistic to see whether you win or lose. Go ahead, look at your losses, look at your tower damage, look at your wins, look at your tower damage. Watch that video, that link is below. Obviously, just be careful not to die, pull out the dragon, curate distance, the enemy jungler's not around, you have the smite. You do have to play it intelligently, and yes, sometimes you will fall, but that's not really the point, it's the principle. You will now see other examples from the other games I referenced of him doing a loop pathing, showing up in one location, leaving before returning, drawing a circle pathing on the map, or at least some kind of circle pathing. And it also happens again in this game as soon as he respawns after taking that dragon. Going up to look to gank the top lane, it's warded, no problem. I go down and I do my blue, my grump, my wolves, and then I rejoin my top lane. A little bit of a circular path, but I get to where I wanted to be. And again, we don't quite get the kill, but that's absolutely fine. The intent here is the most important thing. And when you make the right plays, regardless of the result, more often than not, you will find yourself in a good situation to play off of. In this case, free Herald. And of course, if you've watched the Dragon vs Herald video, you'll know exactly how to use a good Herald. You want to get to the mid game as strong as possible. You want to get to the mid game 14-50 minutes, maximizing plate security, as well as getting yourself a huge item lead and a huge experience lead so that you can simply hold waves in negative game states. So that if you are in a behind game like he was in the Lucian one, you're umbrella jungling. Simply swoop and control your jungle while pathing in the behind of the map, controlling the wards in your jungle, and being as safe as possible when things aren't going your way. Obviously with the LeBlanc game, our main game, yeah, everything's going super peachy. It's great. We're taking all the ganks, we're getting all the kills, almost, but we have control, and the Echo's really done nothing at all about it, and the LeBlanc is playing out of her mind. But in the highlights of the Lucian video, you're seeing it's a very different game plan, and the way he's pathing, even though it's at like 350 speed, is very, very different in terms of the aggression. He is fed, he is playing well because he did the exact same formula executed to the game state, but something that didn't really come up in our main game example where he uses it very well when the game is a bit more neutral or behind is what I've termed cutting the map historically, because we'd have, people sequencing, full sequencing, junglers, Karthus, Hecarim, Udyr, non-brain jungling really. Top to bot to top, you're simply sequencing in a direction, doing something else, resetting, doing it again. What we've seen in this video is a good ability to swap our direction and adapt to the enemy jungler, using our lead, using loop pathing. But if you want to keep sequencing in a certain direction because it's the right play, you're snowballing the right lane, the enemy jungler is going in the same direction as you, what you want to be able to do is cut the map. There are multiple ways to cut the map, but what it means is to cut your full sequence short by either reactively pathing to an event or something happening on the map where you can maximize kills, damage, affect your team, stop farming, take your head out of the sand, you're not an ostrich, and go and do stuff. Good old-fashioned PvP aggressive jungling as we need. But also it means sometimes making a proactive play against another farming jungler. When you're against an aggressive ganking jungler who might not want to sequence as much, but you can, then yes, you will reactively cut the map quite often. But if you're against a full farming jungler who's just going to look to do their business, you can basically be proactive about this by saying, hey, look, I finished my blue quadrant, I finished my red quadrant. You know what? The enemy jungler is going to be busy farming, so why don't I just cut and stop short? Maybe I'll go take a dragon. Why don't I just cut and stop short? I'll take a herald. Why don't I just cut and stop short, maybe gank a lane and get pressure and force them to go in, and now I can counter jungle them and maybe dive the side lane. You would have seen a good digital map explaining this, but what I really want to drive home as you see more highlights of this rumble absolutely decimating all enemies and foes in his wake, is that when you take the concept of a good aggressive level 1 and early game clear to maximize your level 6, and when you use good loop pathing, when you cut the map, when you have a good extended sequence, which means staying out longer than you normally would to react to the events on the map, and when you use umbrella jungling to make sure that in negative game states you're still getting yours and you're still denying them the ability to really snowball that lead, you're gonna end up in the most perfect position as a jungler in the mid to the late game every single game. And that's why I love this jungler's playstyle, because now after that, we've spoken about this a lot lately, pushing the map is the most important thing. When you have a lead, when you're strong, doesn't really matter on the game state, you just need to win one fight, one juicy flank, one juicy use of your ultimate, no matter what champion you are. Now you're pushing towers, you're pushing into the enemy territory, placing wards, stealing their stuff, pushing the side lanes up, you're falling back to dragons and barons, you're sneaking barons even because it's way too easy to take, and now you're living in their territory and they really can do nothing but starve very, very slowly before you eventually close out. And the one downside of this jungler's playstyle is he is actually quite slow to close. A lot of the games where he has a huge lead doesn't really close that quickly. And that's also not necessarily a bad thing. It means it's a bit more methodical. You're simply slowly taking all the towers. You're going to move to multiple inhibs. You're not looking to bum rush it down and potentially throw by overcommitting or overstaying. It means when your teammates are the enemy and when your teammates decide, hey, we want to have fun, you don't have fun. You simply keep split pushing waves and making sure there's wave pressure so that even if your team make bad mistakes, you're hitting the towers, the waves are crashing, and they cannot simply just end the game by one throw. There's a lot to be said for how one game can just end because of bounties in a throw, but there's also a lot to be said about how you can deny them those bounties, and you can put the map in a position where it really doesn't happen. So this final section not really related to the aggressive jungle pathing of getting giga fed by 50 minutes with any champion choice, but something of a very important note when it comes to late game and mid game macro when you have a jungle lead, as it were, in terms of closing games out. As always, I will link the match history in the description below, so go have a look. See the huge champion pool? Yes, his second most played is Rumble, but if he can do this with Rumble in high elo, then you can do it with any other champion in your respective elo, and without a doubt, if you apply these advanced jungling pathing principles to your game plan, you will find yourself having leads more often than not, and you will see from the diamond coaching video we released last week in the top right box that it can really help anyone climb to your peak. But sometimes it's not the techniques that are holding you back, it's your mental, and if you want that to be fixed, click the link in the box on the bottom left.